Alright, hi YouTube. I'm here to review Roberto Bolaño's 2666. It took me a while to prepare for this video because I want to be a bit more thorough in my reviews and do the research. One issue with this book is that I read it about 7 years ago and reread one part of it 2 years ago and don't really have the details in my head. But the book still has a strong, lasting impression on my mind because of how much I liked it at the time and how much I was obsessed with its contents, its subject matter and themes, and its writing style. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and one of the books I keep thinking about when I think about issues such as difference between third world and first world problems, globalization. Free-flowing movement of capital, getting older as someone, as a young adult, and transitioning into an adult, finding one's passion and eventually getting bored of it and settling for a job just for the sake of having an income. But there's also something in it that I really relate to, which is the sense of boredom people feel in life. And at the same time, amid all this boredom people feel through most of their life, since most people who live in this world that have a relatively stable life or really stable life, live a life of, let's say, quiet desperation, because all you do is wake up, eat breakfast, go to work, come back home, have dinner, lunch, exercise, and just sleep and repeat and do the same thing. There are some horrible things that happen in the world. No matter where you live and how well you live, or how bad you live, or how stable you are. And these horrible things that we see on the news or we hear about from friends or social media or wherever kind of impinges on our consciousness, or individual or public collective consciousness, and it kind of intrudes on us. But I started to realize after reading this book that from all the horrible things that have happened in the world in recent memory or still ongoing, a lot of them end up in the back of our minds and don't really come too much in our conversation, because either we don't care or we get desensitized. And this is what I really liked about this book, because I really relate to it. Like I said in all my videos, I'm from Lebanon. I grew up here, and it's a fairly relatively stable country compared to other Middle Eastern countries, but it's a country that just got out of a civil war about 29 years ago, and still has the scars from that civil war. And we deal with a lot of instability because of bordering Israel and Syria, not to mention political interventions from Saudi Arabia and Iran and the United States and other superpowers or whatever. There's a lot of horrible things the world and this country, and people like me who are relatively well off, we don't really think about them that often, because just to stay sane and functional, we have to get our shit done and get it over with, and talk about it with friends once in a while, but that's it. And this is like the main reason why I really wanted to give a fairly thorough review of this book. Now, Roberto Bolaño was a Chilean poet and novelist who was born around the 50s. I think 1940, 1954, 1950, yes, 1950. He was born at a time when I think Chile was going through a lot of political turmoil. He was coming of age when Chile was electing its Allende, democratically elected president, who was left wing, but was then ousted at a coup by U.S.-backed Pinochet. Bolaño was a supporter of Allende, and because of the coup, was considered to be a political terrorist and ended up in jail because of that. I think that experience, among others at this time around Latin America, being involved in the literary scene and the politics, really influenced his writing. If you read his books, you get the impression a lot of his characters are, if not heavily involved in literature, poetry, and writing, are severely affected by politics of Latin America. Um, Bolaño spent a lot of his time traveling around Latin America, but I think mostly spent a lot of his time after his 15th, 16th year going to Mexico. But from what I could tell from the way, what he writes about, he seems to have extensive knowledge of Latin American history, of like meeting other Latin Americans. He has a deep respect for Latin American writers, mostly Borges and Julio Cortázar, and is also famous or infamous for hating Gabriel Garcia Marquez for birthing magical realism. Anyway, eventually settled in Blanes, Spain, where he got married and started having a family. And he switched to writing novels instead of poetry because he thought that would support his family more, which is like a funny move. But I do think that it was a good move, considering that he is now internationally acclaimed and his books are read by a lot of serious readers. And I'm really glad he made that decision because I really enjoy his books, and good for his kids. Proud to have a father like that. So on with the book. The book is structured, to different 5 parts, very loosely interrelated, but with common themes, and most of them, if not all of them, touch on the femicides in this fictional city of Santa Teresa, which is based on the real life city of Ciudad Juarez, which does, I don't know about now, but which did have a big problem of femicide, female, high rates of murders of women in the 90s to the mid-early 2000s. So the first part deals with these 4 academics who built their career on being scholars on this reclusive, enigmatic German writer called Benno von Archibaldi, which is a pseudonym. And the second part is based on this kind of odd, aloof Mexican teacher who raises his daughter in Santa Teresa, but it becomes a bit scared and concerned for the safety of his daughter for living in the city because of its reputation of high rates of female homicides. And the third part deals with an American journalist called Oscar Fate, who gets sent down to Mexico to cover a boxing match, which he's not interested in, but it's like a puff piece. He does it anyway. Gets disinterested in his, he's already disinterested, but he gets sidetracked into getting interested in the femicides in Santa Teresa, which few people know about apparently, and ends up having a chance to interview a prime suspect of these murders. The fourth part of the book actually deals with the femicides directly by detailing the individual lives and deaths of the women in Santa Teresa. It is maybe the core of the book, I would say, and the most disturbing, but also I would like to think, the heart of the book, in that it details the deaths of these women at first in a very detached way, and that you don't really feel like you're drawn in to their death. You don't feel like something horrible is being committed. You feel like it's written as a matter of fact way, like it's a journal, like it's a newspaper, when like you hear murders happening all the time. You said like, oh, so and so got murdered at this time and this place because of this motive and so. But eventually, this detached way of writing has a reverse effect of drawing you closer into the lives of these women. Bolano references a lot of details about their lives, of what these women came from. Most of them work in these Mexican factories called maquiladores. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And a lot of them are poor working class women who were already treated badly for being just women in working class neighborhoods in Mexico. There's a big problem about how women are treated in Latin America as a whole, but in that particular place, it's not so good. And you start empathizing with these women as people, and start feeling, I guess, the sense of like empathy that is very refreshing when like writers usually write about women, people who die in novels most of the time. Like most of the time, they start with a life and then the death. But a Bolano starts with like you know death, life and death, and you just feel like it shouldn't be this way. Not not only that they should die so randomly and arbitrarily because based on the whims of men and people in power, but because like why do we not care enough of these deaths and atrocities happening through world countries? Why isn't it reported by the media? The character of the journalist, who lives in Texas, didn't know about this, even though he's a journalist. A lot of Americans don't know about the deaths happening in the real city of Ciudad Juarez. Why is that the case? It's one of those questions of like first world problems versus third world problems. First world lives matter more than third, and the way Bolaño writes about this is so subtle and so without being holier than thou, without putting in your face, makes you think. Of course, even the Mexicans themselves realize their lives matter less than the lives of like white women or white men. So it's a sense of like we take it for granted how human lives are treated differently just because we happen to be born and raised in different parts of the world. And what's really dark is that all of these murders end up being, if not unsolved, then left in a cold trail because there's certain women who, like, there's a detective who eventually finds a trail, ends up linking one of the murders with a man who has a connection with a politician, or a man, or like one of the murders linked with a politician who, and eventually when this politician finds out that the detective is close to his murder, like gets a call from his boss saying, hey, stop investigating this comes from high up in the government, we can't do anything. And it's very frustrating because this is something that happens, I would say, in a lot of places in the third world. It happens in Lebanon often. You mess with a guy who has connections in this country, and you get shot or injured, you're fucked. You can't touch the guy. The guy's immune. And this really ignited my passion for political issues, social economic issues, and why these things are tolerated by rational and sensible people. Why people don't give a shit. It made me very angry, and also made me really love how Bolaño writes about this without spoon-feeding it to you, without shoving in your face how unfair life is, but how, this is the horror of the world. And I think this is best encapsulated by these two lines from Baudelaire right at the beginning of the book. An oasis of horror in a desert of boredom. The boredom being what I talked about earlier, about like how most of the characters in life are bored to death from their jobs and their how boring life is in general as an adult in the middle of you live in Europe or the States or first world country or even a third world country. Life is boring. Yet all this horrible shit happens, and that's pretty much the theme of the book for me. This contrast between boredom and horror. And I don't think the world is all that bad, but I think this is the way Bolaño saw it in the span of it, in this time, because of where he grew up and the time in which he grew up. And for a while, I did feel this is how the world is, but I think it's not as bad as that. There are horrible shit, but I don't think people are that disaffected. I think a lot of us are sensitized, but I think that's necessary for us to be to function. Anyway. I do want to talk a bit about the fifth part of the book, which involves the reclusive writer von Arcimboldi. But like I said, I read this 7 years ago, so I don't remember much. But I think this is maybe the cliffhanger of the book, in that the first part of the book was it was just propelled by this idea that there was this enigmatic, elusive figure that we have to find out where he is, and academics never find him. But you get to see his life story in the fifth part, and it's kind of supposed to be like this payoff. But it is in a way. His life is very interesting. But it's for me, the fifth part of the book was almost as disturbing, if not more, as the fourth part about the femicides, because it usually talks about, it just talks about a life of Archimboldi, which is his real name is, I think, Hans Ritter. Um, he grew up in around the time of World War II and has a very strange childhood. His first book he ever read was like a textbook about different underwater plants, and descriptions of his time at the Eastern Front as a soldier and eventual deserter. It's just disturbing. I mean, I don't read a lot of war novels. It's not that I don't like them, but like I never came across a lot of them. I don't actively seek them, but I think it was the way Bolaño describes what war can do to people and how it can change some people in some way. Archimboldi doesn't, I mean, definitely has some form of PTSD, but is fairly, functional throughout his life. He writes these novels that were like the way Bolaño writes, the way Bolaño talks about Archimboldi's novels as if they're, mediocre, novels that don't have the literary value, but eventually become the obsessions of these critics in part one. But the life of this man seems very aimless and wandering, and seems to be leading nowhere, despite the fact that a whole industry, a whole academic literary industry is built on his works, and I find that to be hilarious as a satire against academia, and shows how people's works to be misunderstood by critics and just build a career out of it anyway. I just find that funny. But it's also sad towards the end when there's a lot of sense of loss and decay in Archimboldi's life. I don't want to give too much away, first of all, because the beauty of this book is not about how some things are written, but how they are shown by omission. In that a lot of the important points are shown by the reader realizing what the person has lost by the person not doing anything, or by reflecting on silence, or just being alone, and by how people don't care about some things just because that's how they act when confronted with a certain reality. What can you do if you're a surviving veteran of World War II and live off of like these trashy novels you write and go from around the world and try to settle to Mexico? It's a sad and lonely and interesting life. I don't want to give the ending too much away, but like to be honest, there's almost no ending. It's a fairly plotless book, but it still managed to encompass a huge portion of the globe. I've never. First time I read this book, I was like, I had no idea literature could do this. I've feel like I've been into the hearts and minds of different characters, different parts of the world. I feel like I can empathize with so many people I've never been able to empathize before, because I have no idea what other people go through, and I just no idea how other people in the world are as bored and depressed, they're anxious, and also this illusion of the world as I am. It made me feel so small and connected with people in the world at the same time. So at the end of the book, Archimboldi is like aging, like in his late 70s and early 80s, and like knows he's about to die, and he wants to find his nephew, who is the prime suspect of the murders, and it's not really a spoiler, although I should write it down in the description. It's a spoiler, okay. And ends up having the sense of dread about his own death. And I've never felt more anxious about a character contemplating his own death, because Bolano was actually dying at the time of his writing of this book. He was dying of liver failure in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it was just, I just felt for Archimboldi and how his whole life was mainly like, having a very, normal to very poor childhood in this village in Germany, with the outbreak of the war, and then having a very nomadic lifestyle almost like Bolano actually, but also realizing he's bored and disinterested in the world. He's just shut in his own mind. Unable to write any good, halfway good books anymore, and now was to confront the idea that like he's gonna die. I found that almost as chilling as disturbing as the femicides. Although, the death of many people is much worse than the death of one person. But like, I found this book to be one of the most profound and authentic meditations on death. And I was like 19 at the time I read it, and I felt very, not scared, but reinvigorated, in that I felt like I cannot believe how lucky I am to have so much life ahead of me, how grateful I am that I don't have to worry about these things for a while, and that I'm not the only one who thinks about them. So anyway, okay, I'm sorry if I sound rambling. Like I said, I haven't read this in a while, and I just want to get this review over with. It is definitely one of my favorite books of all time. I've only read it once completely, and the second time I only read the first part, but I really want to read this book from cover to cover another time, because it really left a strong impression on me. I highly recommend reread his other books, The Savage Detectives by Chile, his short stories like Insufferable Gaucho, his collection of short stories like The Insufferable Gaucho, and Last Evenings on Earth. I credit Bolaño for reinventing Latin American fiction and for showing that there's life after Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Thank you all. Bye.